Hi everyone, welcome back to this talk series on the new MA Internet Equalities course, which will be happening at the Creative Computing Institute. This time around we are looking at the unit called Platform Potentials, and we're very lucky to have Hera Hussain to do that with us today. So I'm going to introduce Hera, then give an overview of the unit, and then she and I will get into a discussion, and you can drop any questions you have into the chat as we go along, and then at the end of the session I'll give you some information on how to apply to the course. So Hera Hussain is the founder of Chain, which is a global volunteer-run project crowdsourcing resources on the web to address gender-based violence. Chain has reached more than 360,000 people through its resources, which are designed with survivors of abuse. Born in Scotland, raised in Pakistan and living in the UK, Hera knew from early on that she wanted to empower women. She is a passionate believer in using the power of open source technology and open data to solve the world's pressing issues. When Hera isn't running Chain in her spare time, she works with governments and civil society to open datasets to fight corruption. And she was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 and MIT Technology Review's Innovators Under 35 lists. So we're really lucky to have her here today, and I can't wait for the discussion. Platform Potentials is the final taught unit on the course, and it focuses on the role of internet platforms, cultures and communities in bringing about social change. So students will be looking at the tactics and goals of online activism. What is its potential? How do activists put their goals into actions, whether they are whistleblowers, hackers, or social justice movement builders? They'll also explore movements that shifted public discourse. Black Lives Matter is one example, but we will look at others as well, and we'll look at earlier movements that happened offline, paving the way for the kind of internet activism that we see today. They'll explore controversies in online activism, including debates about its effectiveness and its ethics. And finally, we'll look at aesthetic strategies in online activism, and this is about exploring how artists and creative practitioners have used the language and tactics of activism in their practices, and how online movement building has drawn from art and design to strengthen its power. The unit will be delivered through lectures and seminars, supervised studio practice, and group work and peer learning. It's going to be quite a collaborative unit, and I think that's one of the most exciting and rewarding bits of the learning journey. In terms of learning outcomes, students will synthesize and critically analyze cases of online activism and collective action. So this is about taking case studies from your classes and drawing connections between them, analysing potential differences through an intersectional lens that's been gained throughout the rest of the course. Experimenting with and critically evaluating methods of online activism is about practice, so maybe piloting a small project and then reflecting on its efficacy, its results and its implications. Collaboratively planning and implementing a piece of collective action is really the most exciting part, because it's about working with peers and planning a campaign. We discussed in an earlier talk in this series about how it's not always possible to do the long-term work required to sustain design justice or successful campaigning just within a 10-week unit, but this is really about experimentation and testing, so you can take what you learn on the course into your longer-term practice. And finally, communicating about the intentions, context, sources and arguments surrounding a proposed intervention. This is about developing a strong set of communication skills that position you well to go on and advocate for the value of your own work and the work of others in the future of your career and your role as an internet or non-internet activist. There's some really interesting texts on the reading list for this unit. I'll share just a few of them. So Expect Us, Online Communities and Political Mobilization by Jessica Bayer looks at political activity and mobilization within online communities between 2007 and 2011. So she looks at Anonymous, which emerged from 4chan, the file sharing site Pirate Bay, World of Warcraft and posting boards on IGN.com, and she looks at how some of them moved their activities offline. Beautiful Trouble, A Toolbox for Revolution by Andrew Boyd is a kind of creative toolbox for action, so it tries to distill best practices from global artists and activists and help people instigate actions, anything from flash mobs to larger scale movements. And Digital Identity and Everyday Activism, Sharing Private Stories with Networked Publics by Sonia Vivian, is a really intriguing book about digital storytelling as a form of everyday activism. So how the sharing of personal stories with the aim of challenging the status quo can be seen as an expansion on existing definitions of organised and strategic activism. So that's all I'm going to say, and I'm really happy to now get into the conversation a bit more with Hera. Hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us if you're online. We're going to be chatting for the next while, but you are very welcome to drop any questions you have into the chat as we go along, and we'll try and either kind of weave them into the conversation or pick them up at the end. So welcome, Hera. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great for having me.
Can I start by asking you about the sort of upsurge in activism that we're seeing at the moment, which is a kind of current manifestation of work that's been done over a number of years. Can you tell us a bit about how you understand the term online activism and perhaps how that relates to offline activism, and why does online activism matter?
Great question. I think online activism has probably been like one of the most discussed topics in the last decade, especially when you look at the rise of social media. And I think in the beginning, people really saw it as like a extension of offline activism. But I think it has, over the years, really occupied its own space as well. So while there is a really good link between things that are happening offline, like local neighborhoods, campaigning for something for their their area, to nations working on a particular issue, to then having international campaigns, or having cross-national like movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement. And I think it's interesting that a lot of the discussion around online activism really focuses on slacktivism, which I think is one of the, and that term slacktivism refers to the fact that a lot of it's the online petition culture. So people fill out an online petition, people share it, and people feel like they've done their deed, and that they've made their voice count. And there's a really healthy, I think, debate about why that is really a flawed model, and that it has its limitations to its power. So I think when people talk about online activism, a lot of people immediately think we're talking about petitions, but that's not true anymore. That may have garnered a lot of interest and really sort of made its mark in the online activism like tactic space, but it definitely does not define it. And we've seen people being really creative. The thing that really excites me is that people feel sort of two things. One is people who, for various reasons, cannot participate in person in activists, like whether it's going to meetings with like politicians, or is it organizing spaces, or it's demonstrating. All of these like really powerful traditional activist tactics in the activist toolbox are often not accessible and also not safe, depending on where you are and who you are. If you're an undocumented migrant and you want to get involved in organizing, it can be really dangerous for you to be part of that, and put yourself on the line, because you can literally be kicked out of the country for that. Your life could be at risk. Similarly, if you're a minority in a country where there's a lot of discrimination against that minority, that there's real harm there. But going back to the fact I grew up in Pakistan, I have a lot of examples from Pakistan. So a lot of women, are not allowed to march, though it's definitely changing. So for them, being part of the online activist space, it really opens up a whole world of them being involved in their own liberation and also fighting for other people's rights. And I think that is a really powerful like angle, the fact that it offers you some safety. Of course, if you want to think more about like doxing and all the other online safety issues, the online space is not without its threats. But for a limited amount of involvement that does happen, though in many countries in the UAE, the fact that you sign up to a petition can actually land you in jail as well. So that's something to think about. But the other thing that excites me is that people are claiming the online space as a public space and saying that, this is an issue I care about, and feeling like they don't need to be a celebrity to weren't amplified before. And yeah, that's really exciting. I mean, in the UK, we've seen so many examples of like amazing campaigns led by survivors of domestic abuse, sexual harassment, stalking. And these are people who, were disempowered by the crime that happened to them, but then they were able to lead campaigns, change laws. The upskirting law is an example of that. It's just, or the fact that a journalist that was covering housing issues managed to change, I'm talking about Vicky Spratt, who managed to change the law, which means that, tenants don't have to pay agency fees anymore, which costed a fortune. So these are really cool examples of how, young people have really mobilized online spaces to sort of achieve these goals.
Amazing. That it's so good to hear you talking about how criticisms of selectivism don't necessarily take that sort of intersectional perspective into account. That's really, really helpful. Also, great point about not needing to be a celebrity to have a voice, and that actually the internet allows people who don't necessarily occupy those kind of spaces to make really significant impacts. So thank you for that. You mentioned survivor-led campaigns, and I know that a lot of the work that you do at Chain is survivor-led. So can you talk a bit about that as your method?
Yes, sure. So Chain is a nonprofit that creates online resources for survivors of gender-based violence, and up to 70% of our volunteers are survivors of abuse, which I find really powerful, because when I was starting the organization 7 years ago, I found that a lot of the nonprofit space in both the UK, Pakistan, US, like all the countries that I was interested in because of there was an issue that was close to me, were very top down. And I wanted to change that model. I just felt like people who've experienced a problem really know the pain points. And if they could be involved in the creation of a solution, you're not just getting a better product at the end of it, and that product could be a guide that tells someone how to collect evidence of abuse. It could be a service. But the fact, if they're really part and at the heart of the design process, you also, empower them through the process of creation. And that's just the kind of power that, we need to embody as organizations that are trying to solve these issues. So that's why I set up Chain the way I did. And it was really controversial at that time, because people were like, well, how do you know things are of good quality? Even now, like, I think every time we fill a funding application, that's the question that we get, which is around, how do you ensure that the quality is good, the advice is good? And there are definitely ways around that. And the way we do it is by getting the survivors to create it. And then we put it out to our community of experts, and then they can like help edit it. So the quality check is still there. And also, I think a lot of the traditional like thinking is that you produce a report, which is like bulletproof, but then it's only valid for that year that it was produced. And then you spend lots of money updating it. Whereas if you take a digital approach to it, which is what Chain does, is, like Wikipedia, things are like living documents. When there is a new change, we update it, and that it would reflect that. So people who consume our content are aware that some things may be out of date, but then they will be updated, and that they can be part of it. They can say, actually, you wrote this, it just recently got changed, or there's more advice on how to, create more secure passwords. Here's a new platform that helps people do that. Can you link to it? And then we're able to. So that kind of flexibility and agility is something that is very easy for us to do, because, our community of survivors aren't what they care about is getting the answers. They don't care about like anything else around, all the sort of like bureaucratic like layers that get ossified in organizations over time. So yeah, it's a really interesting design process. And I think that it has taught me a lot about how do you really create diverse communities, and then how do you embed diverse ways of thinking into an organization.
It's so interesting. When you were talking, I was wondering if you think that there's any scope for bigger organizations, particularly the tech monopolies, to adopt some of these practices. Do you sense any willingness there? Is it possible to work in this way at scale in a kind of commercial context?
I believe they can on a smaller, like by modifying it. So they often like send out surveys, they will have focus groups, they will have trial periods. So I think these are all ways that they try to modify this approach. But what's really important is that the people who are designing the projects at like the very first stage, when like projects are created and like features are created, that's really when you need the diversity of thought, because you need to think like beyond. And like even when I've seen in like Silicon Valley, this is very typical, they will hire people of color, but the people of color they hire are usually those that have immense privilege or are representing a very Western viewpoint. So yes, they may be closer to, like they might have more understanding of certain like issues to do with diversity, but they will have no geographical diversity in there. So they've not grown in like the global South, for example. So they might not know how a particular like thing could be a problem or an opportunity there. So I think the whole concept of inclusion and diversity needs to be it's not just a tick box exercise and getting them to think about, where are their user bases and how are they like making sure that that is represented in the design process is really key. I remember I met someone at Facebook and I told them, they were asking me about the fact that, why Chen uses Facebook and like what's the most useful thing. And I was telling them, you know what, so many people find us through Facebook,
Right.
that what would be super helpful for me as someone who runs a community there is the ability, like even within volunteers, is to see time zones for people. So when I'm messaging someone, if I can just see when, like if the other person can just see when I sent it and I can see when they like sent it, would be so helpful, because many survivors assume that, they don't know where we are. So they have no concept of when is a good time to reply, or and that really helps. And even within the team, and they were like, oh yeah, we never thought about it. And Slack has that option now. But when Slack started, I again had the same idea, because I was like, I run a global community, and this is something that would be super helpful. So some of these things could have been easily like baked in. Some similar things around safety, like Twitter is a perfect example. Thanks to all the hard work and campaigning by Black feminists, it's rolled out a lot of safety features that really should have been there really early on, and it just took them all that time to listen. So had there been a diverse team that was open to feedback and co-creation, all of the pain and the people who've self-policed or who've left these platforms may have not left it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think it's good to note those moments where activism does make an impact and changes are made even within large corporations, because otherwise, you can feel like you're shouting into a black hole, but actually it's been really positive to see some of those changes. So thanks for mentioning that as well. I'm wondering if you think that there's any kind of limitations to online activism. Are there things that can't be achieved, or are there things that need to be in place particularly for online activism to be effective?
Absolutely. I think I'm standing there with all those people who think that there are far too many people who think signing or creating an online campaign where people take a picture with a slogan is enough. It really isn't. It doesn't change. That may end up changing a law, but that is a long process. You need sustained campaigning, and I think the grit part is missing for a lot of online campaigns, because we've somehow come to because so many people want to start campaigns or campaign on issues that are close to them. There's less coordination between campaigns. Everyone's coming out with their own. And I really think there's a missed opportunity of not working together. and making sure that all the campaigns and movements are grounded in reality, in the structures that we live in. We may think that the government is like unfair for having X, Y, and Z policy, but shouting about it on Twitter is only going to achieve so much. Like, how can we meaningfully engage or disengage? Because disengagement is a very powerful tactic too, with within existing structures, and work with people in those structures to do that. I feel like that's missing a lot. Oftentimes when I'm speaking to activists that are running campaigns, I feel like they're very siloed, and they're not the whole they haven't thought through the whole infrastructure, the system, how do we change. The systems approach is super important. If your point is to make noise, then that's great, you're meeting your goal. But if your point is to change something tangible, then having a thorough analysis of who are the key stakeholders, who have the power and are on your side, or who have power and are not on your side, and how can you change them? What is the kind of framing that you can use? So a lot of those traditional lobbying tactics are super important in campaigning. And I think we need to be willing to transform our online movements into offline. It really should be an extension of each other. They cannot live separately. So I believe some of that thinking is sometimes missing in campaigns that die out early, and which is a shame, because there's so much goodwill and people who sign up to them, donate. And the other thing I would say is accountability, because I absolutely believe that we are in a big black hole when it comes to accountability with online campaigns. There have been so many cases of really high profile people misusing funds. And again, I think for people who are starting new campaigns, baking in accountability and transparency of where the money is going, what you're using the money for, it's so important. And people are very willing to give, but it's not about making people give more. It's also about holding ourselves and making sure that we are only amplifying voices that are using that money well. So there have been far too many scandals, which is a real shame, because the money that is raised should really go towards the cause, the people who need it the most, and not towards for mismanagement or furthering people's own economic empowerment if they don't need it.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting what you were saying there about understanding stakeholders properly. And I was wondering if you could you give an example from your own work of what that kind of map of stakeholders might look like for one of the projects that you've done?
Yeah, be happy to. So I was part of the civil society coalition that was campaigning for more transparency on who truly benefits from starting companies. So you may have heard of shell companies, which are often used for money laundering and corrupt practices and economic crime. So in UK is a big hub of that dirty cash, because of the fact it's so easy to start a company here, and the company registrar in the UK Companies House doesn't have the capacity to do proper fraud checks, and the Serious Fraud Office also is under capacity. So we were we campaigned for the campaigns were going for long years, but when I got involved, we had 2 very strong years of campaigning, and we met our goal. And our goal was for the UK government to release a register of beneficial owners. They're called people who benefit from owning and controlling a company. And it was the first open one, completely open, in open data. And though it didn't go into the amount of detail that we wanted, it achieved most of our goals and was the first in the world. And that campaign, those 2 years, taught me a lot about stakeholder mapping, because we basically had to map, you might have seen a power matrix. So you look at the amount of influence that your stakeholders have, and how much of them are supporters or detractors, and grouping them by the industries, and then targeting a few people in each of those industries. So the key actors for us were real estate agents, because they are selling high price London properties, and really they don't want to be selling them under dubious circumstances as well. So most of them are good faith actors, and it was about getting them on board with our messaging and that they do not want to be selling properties that are used for money laundering and are used by illicit cash. And then the second group was like, politicians on board, like on the two biggest parties, and getting them on board. So we got that. Then we worked on, which was the hardest, was like lawyers and accountants, because they, because of the way the industry is, it was hard to get some of those key actors on board, but we worked hard on it. And once you got a few, word started spreading, and if you can get the key actors in each of those spaces, then others start signing up to support you. And then we did collective campaigning, so everyone brought it up, like using the power that they had. So some lawyers wrote like academic papers explaining like how this would work under the UK law and it would be fine. Campaigners brought like public campaigning. There was a group of like anti-corruption campaigners that actually did a kleptocracy, like a bus tour in London. So they took people on a bus tour of the most corrupt properties in London, and which oligarchs and like people who've basically taken money away from their countries and then ran away and are hiding in exile in the UK and where they live. So they were like public campaigns like that, as well as meeting with stakeholders. And I was involved in the data side and looking at like making the case for why this data would bring value to the UK, not just for an anti-corruption purpose, but also as a business, creating more avenues for businesses to use that data set to do business intelligence. So we were kind of tackling it from different angles, and it was a really successful campaign, and it really paved the way for more countries who were already thinking about doing this. But once the UK did it, they were like, okay, well, one country's done it, no one's died, and like nothing major, like no major problem has happened, so let's do the same thing. So that's an example of a really like a moment in time that I will always remember as like a really successful campaign on an issue that people have been working on for decades, and to see it actually happen.
That's amazing and fascinating to see that stakeholder group kind of mapped out, and to give people a sense of how important it is. We don't, again, think of this as something that just functions on the internet, that it's actually something that's really based in offline spaces as well. So that's fantastic. Part of the unit involves looking at case studies of campaigns, and I was wondering, are there any campaigns that run by other people that you've seen and been really, really inspired by, or kind of represented a pivotal moment for you?
Yes, so many. I think the ones that I'm always taking inspiration from in the transparency space would be things around tax justice, because that is a really, like, it's an issue that's really hard to mobilize people around, especially governments around. So the tax justice movement in the UK and abroad have been very, very inspiring. Similar things around like the human trafficking sector. They've made a lot of progress in the last 5-6 years, and I think that's you can see the cogs turning there. And many groups have worked on it. And then in the US, I think the thing that's been really encouraging to see is all the work that Rise has been leading in terms of changing. I think they changed 49 laws around survivor rights for survivors of sexual assault. So the fact that you should not, as a survivor, you should not have to pay to get your own rape kit tested, and that the rape kits must be tested and they cannot be lying around untested. So they've done a lot of work on that. It's been really inspiring. In Pakistan, so my friends and other people who I know have been campaigning really hard for punishments for like cyber harassment, and they've been able to make some inroads, though it did, on the flip side, also mean that the government can use the same law to clamp down on speech. But there is the provision there that you can, at least someone can go to jail for blackmailing you for the release of intimate photos and things like that. So these are all really inspiring movements, I think. And then there's some other ones which I'm like less I'm further apart from, but I just like really love looking at it. Like there was a really cool movement around making it okay to post pictures of women and people menstruating on Instagram and other places. There was the campaign to make sure that people could change their names on Facebook if they were trans, and they had like changed their and making sure that people could have their drag names in their profiles. That was really inspiring. And there's just so many. I keep thinking there's like a lot of stuff happening in the period poverty movement as well. And it's an exciting time that you have all of these issues that are so close to people, and people are like mobilizing, and people and governments are listening. So at the moment, I'm super excited about the fact that we are thinking about alternative ways of funding and structuring police forces. So the fact that Minneapolis is looking to defund the police as it is, disbanding it, and then making a new structure, combining with community practices, I am really excited to see what that looks like.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is a perfect segue, because I really wanted to ask you as well about sort of efficacy and measuring impact. And you've talked already about how, for example, some campaigns lead to changes in the law, and obviously that's a very measurable impact. You can see exactly what's resulted from a campaign in that sense. But how do you at Chain approach measuring impact, and how can people start to think about that if they're starting out?
Yeah, it's a good question. So at Chain, we don't run campaigns. We support a lot of campaigns that other people run. So it's a bit, for us, measuring impact is about looking at how many people our survivors are engaging with. And that is, that's key. Interestingly, our chapter in Italy has been doing a lot of campaigning around how like domestic abuse and sexual violence is reported in the press. And it's often sensationalized in Italy. Phrases like stormy relationship, or in a fit of passion, that kind of terminology that is used to reduce the culpability of the abuser and victim blame the survivor. So they've been doing some work on that. We recently worked together they came up with a term which would be an alternative to revenge porn, which is a term I really, really detest. And I ask everyone that I come across who uses it to change it to like non-consensual like images or image-based abuse, because that's really what it is. So they came up with a terminology for that in Italian, so that is the term that people use rather than using revenge porn, because you're just reconfirming people's bias about the fact that this is recorded as porn when it's really, really not. And I think that however, now that we are changing we are doing some new and exciting work, which is more service-led. So we'll have a chance to actually collect more data. And we tend to think very carefully about what data we collect. We try to collect as little as possible and never force someone into getting that information. So I'm actually exploring it myself, and I'm very keen on hearing from other people who might be listening. If you have any ideas of like ethical data practices, there's a group that's led by the Engine Room, which is the responsible data. It's called the Responsible Data Network. And that they share a lot of resources on responsible data collection. But in terms of campaigns, from what I've seen, I think the campaigns that I've been involved in on the transparency world, there are definite like touch points. So some of them are about changing the tone of a debate, which I think is so important. So the whole thing about like how we talk about an issue, really important. Like taking the example of tax. Tax used to be something that nobody wanted to touch because people were scared that businesses would go, rich people would leave countries. We are no longer talking about tax in those terms. Tax justice is something people understand, and they know that it has a clear link to progress and like social mobility and like all these things. So the fact that we're talking about that is great. Same thing if you think about like intersectional feminism. So I don't think there is some campaign that is running that, so no one's like capturing insights on it. But as a society, and the amazing people who like coined this term, and the people who've done work to further this term, even though there's like no one person you can say, actually, this person organized this campaign and this organization did this, everyone together, the fact that this terminology is understood and we've moved away from some of the like dangerous or harmful ways of thinking about feminism is amazing. I think that is a clear, so in the terms of changing the conversation, that's a definite yes. And then you go towards like more substantive changes, like changing a company's policies or changing government's policies, laws, changing in the way our spaces are organized. All of those things I think are successful, like, metrics. So the metrics don't just have to be how many people signed a petition, though that is important because then you can see how many people you engage. But it's about like, what is the call to action and what is that going to substantially change? I'm generally very skeptical of anything that asks anyone to post a picture, for instance, because I'm not sure what the goal is. If the goal is to change the conversation, it makes sense. But then how are we continuing? How does that touch point, if you only have a touch point with a petition signer, which is they signed a petition and shared it on Facebook, like that's like you ending the journey there. Like, how are we continually engaging them so they carry that message into their day-to-day life? Are they challenging racism in their house? Are they challenging racism in their public spaces? Are they challenging racism in their relationships? What substantive thing are they? If they can't do all of that, or if they have done all of that, what is the next thing they should do? Should they be donating? Should they be like, what are the things that they're doing to change? It's so easy to talk, and it's so easy to just stop at that slacktivist threshold. Is like, how do we move people beyond that? I think all of those things should be part of, like when you're setting up campaigns or organizations goals, that those are the things you need to think about.
That's really helpful. I was going to ask you actually, what advice you might give to students on this unit who are being asked to develop their own activist project or some kind of coordinated action, and that seems to be an amazing piece of advice for them to bear in mind. Are there any other things you would like them to consider as they're going through that kind of process?
Yeah, I would also think about framing. I think how you frame a problem and the solution is so powerful. Giving people a reason why something is not working and your explanation of it and what could change this is really important, because people, if a problem is so big that there's no solution that they can touch or change, it's demoralizing and people are less likely to join that effort. So it's like, if I said that Chen's mission is to end patriarchy, that is absolutely our mission, but for a campaign that's just not possible. So what is the exact thing that we're trying to do with a campaign is important. So like having realistic goals, it's not to say you shouldn't be ambitious, but it's more like, what is, like, it's a big problem, so what bit am I attacking? And that's what I would look at.
Yeah, it's a good point. You need to do something that's actually manageable, and a friend of mine calls that feeling of kind of despair at the magnitude of social issues, he kind of refers to it as like despondency, like when you face problems that seem so insurmountable, that can put you in a space where you think nothing can be done, and it creates this kind of inertia. So yeah, I think that's really good advice as well. I wanted to sort of finish by asking you a question about the work that you've been doing with Chain, because the work you do there is so inspiring, and not only the amazing kind of COVID response with the trauma resilience course that you turned around so quickly, but all of the work that you've been doing with your community over the years that allowed you to be able to respond so quickly in this crisis. And I'd love to hear what have been some of the kind of proudest moments for you working in that organization.
That's a big question. What are the proudest moments? I would say my first proud moment would probably be like just like the first bits of feedback that I got from survivors saying, I one of my favorite ones is the survivor in India emailed us saying, I've been searching for how to get a divorce for 2 years. And every time I search, I come across forums in which male lawyers and men are discussing how women like abuse the divorce law to take their kids away. And no one ever discusses like how I can actually do it. And I'm so depressed every time I come across them. So by coming to your side, it's the first time I found, okay, this is what the law says, and these are my rights. So thank you so much for that. Or that really, really touched me. We also, the fact that we, I think a few years ago, someone we had never met, had never heard of, because again, the way we organize, we often don't hear from survivors one-on-one. Just message to say, just wanted to say that, I got out of my relationship and you were the reason that it happened. And we were like, wow. Or one of our volunteers who had been in an abusive relationship and it had ended just before she started volunteering for Chen. And she was like, she was so self-depreciating and did not have any confidence, and like within a year was like leading projects and kind of being there with me. It was just really amazing to see the transformation. Or like one of the things that we pride ourselves in is being open-minded. So if we know someone needs some work and needs to improve as a like feminist or as a person, we kind of give them the space to do that within Chen. So we had someone join who was a male entrepreneur and then said some stuff which we felt was victim like blaming. So we had a conversation with them, and they just decided to leave the group themselves and said, I've realized that I need to work on myself before I can be part of this space. So I've taken up all the feedback that you've given me, and I'm gonna come back once I've like learned all of this. And to me, that was just really amazing to have someone have that self-reflection and gave me a lot of like trust in myself. I was like, okay, so this was a good decision to let this person in because it gave them some like insight, and then I think for the trauma group has just the feedback that we've had for this has just been really, really like emotional for us, because we came up with a complete new service in 7 days, rolled it out, and then someone said to us that they had we're offering a glimmer of hope in a very, very dark time. And another one said that they had engaged in many forms of support but didn't really find one that matched their lifestyle, and this was the most perfect one for them to engage in because they could set the tone. So we've had lots of amazing feedback. The UK government started linking to Chen this year from their COVID response page, which I was really happy about, because it's really nice to have the government on which you are registered as an organization endorse your work. And it was a very proud moment for the volunteers. And yeah, so there's been like lots of amazing moments. It's hard to choose, but these are the ones that came to mind.
That's wonderful. As I say, it's really, really inspiring work. So thank you for that. And it's great to hear those sort of sustaining stories. And, it's really uplifting at a time which has been really difficult. So thank you so much for that. I think if we don't have questions, we'll wrap up. If people do want to ask anything in the next few moments, you're very, very welcome to. But again, just a big thank you to you, Hera, for being with us. It's been so lovely to talk to you as always. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'll just say a few words about applying for the course. The first thing to say is that the CCI is working to create and maintain a diverse and inclusive community, and we do welcome applications from people of any gender or gender identity, race, class, or ability that can demonstrate critical knowledge of and enthusiasm for the subject. So the most important thing when you're applying is to have a kind of well-articulated rationale about why you want to take part in the course. There are no coding skills required to apply either. And we do recognise that financing postgraduate study can also be really challenging. There are some avenues for means-tested financial support and some small bursaries which we can give advice on if you email us. So you can apply by visiting the link below, and you can also email the CCI if you do have any questions about the course. So thank you everyone that's been with us live, and do get in touch if you've got any questions, and otherwise we'll see you on the internet. Thank you.